Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Power of Youth podcast. Today we will be discussing religious freedom. If you missed last week's episode, we talked about the bushfire crisis. Make sure you go check it out and come back here. As always, I'm joined by Alex and Alannah.
Hi.
G'day.
G'day.
So, to start with, this topic really gained a lot of traction through the media from a bill which was announced earlier this year. So what did this bill involve?
Well, the bill was in a response to the 2017 Act that decriminalised the marriage of gay people and lesbian, and it allowed people of any gender to get married. So this was in response to that, to really flesh out the new religious freedoms and exemptions for religious bodies in terms of the marriage amendment.
So this bill was introduced in November, and kind of the main thing about it was that it prohibits discrimination in certain areas of public life on the ground of religious beliefs or activity. In terms of just that comment, I think you could say, okay, it seems to make sense that we want to prohibit discrimination, but was that really the case? And I think it's that difficult thing to consider is it discrimination if I'm saying something, or what defines discrimination?
Yeah, it's a really hard one because what you might find as discrimination, I might not. Like, it's not black and white. Like, in different circumstances, people might feel different things about certain statements. And it's really hard to allow religious freedoms and statements of belief that might cause harm or offense to other people. And it's a really broad law. Like, the bill, like, it's very broad. There's so much room for subjectivity.
Yeah, and I think you also have to there's also a bit of a lack of understanding around the nuance between what might be, someone might just find offensive, and what something actually might generally be disrespectful.
Yeah.
Saying something disrespectful. So say Simeon might say something offensive to me, but I don't necessarily feel disrespected by it. I might just shake it off. But there are things that are sort of quite, disrespectful. Something that's disrespectful to say, and I think, there's a bit of a nuance around that as well with this difficulty around what someone might find offensive and what someone else might not, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, like, I think if there was a clear line, it'd be easier to create a law that would then make some things illegal and some things legal, but it's a matter of, can you control what someone's response is going to be to what you say, and that's what you can't do, which is where we're left with this middle bit where people are so unsure of what to say. You even see it without this law in just everyday life. People are so worried about what they say because it can have such a detrimental impact. You see politicians and public figures, and they say one controversial thing which maybe was considered fine 10 or 20 years ago, and it destroys their career.
Yeah. Well, I believe that words have the power you give them, and people choose to take offense to things. But in saying that, I don't condone like rude or nasty behavior, but the political correctness of this modern world has put like a massive restriction on free speech. Like you said, people are scared where they step, what they say. Like, it has to be non-offensive for everybody. And yeah, you really can take things out of context, and people can take offense to things that aren't offensive to other people.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of everywhere you look, there's this, especially, and it's really been one of the negatives of social media is that it's exacerbated this, but there's sort of this constant culture of, I need to be outraged by something, whether it be a politician saying something a bit crude, or someone, in America you have Kaepernick kneeling during the national anthem as a protest, and that caused a lot of trouble. There just seems to be this need to always constantly be outraged by something.
Yeah.
And everyone just wants to find a way. People are finding excuses to be annoyed and to be offended. Yeah. And that really gets on my nerve. A good one for me is that with comedy. Like a lot of live comedians and stuff really struggle, and and a lot of them struggle because they just don't know what material to use.
Yeah.
But then I also think there's this flip side in that some of them, that you have a lot of people as a response to this sort of culture of outrage, I guess you could call them a troll in a way, just get pleasure out of causing them, get just really fun. I think it's fun to cause outrage. And it's this really bad sort of, and then they're offensive and crude to the point it's just obscene and they're not even making a point anymore. It's kind of just, it's over the top and it's unnecessary. So there definitely needs to be that balance found so we don't have these one opposite of the constant outrage and the other opposite of I just have to cause as much trouble as possible.
Yeah, and with this outrage culture, the vocal minority really outweighs the silent majority in these circumstances.
Yeah, I think so. I think also it's a matter of the classic targeting a minority or someone, or just putting the blame on someone else. Often in cases of where someone said something and you oppose their race, you oppose their religion, you oppose their beliefs, it's so much easier to then turn that back onto them. And it's almost a double standard in the sense where you could say it to some person but you won't say that same response back to someone else because they are unlikable to you, but those people are okay.
Yeah, I think that just needs to be, especially with if you're going to be, say, critical of one religion, be critical of all. Say someone's an atheist, I don't think that they should just be always criticising Christianity or just always be criticising Judaism. They should, if they're someone who's elected to not be a religious individual, that there should be a sense of equality in that I am either free to not criticise or criticise all religions. I just shouldn't focus on one, like you said, Simi. Because I think there is a bit of like a fear around criticising certain groups over others. Yeah,
and I think it's that interesting point as well that in the discussion it's all been about Christianity.
Yeah.
When this is about all religions and people aren't that's not being conveyed at all. I think one thing was by the Muslim community and how they felt like they needed extra protection from the vilification from the community and that this law didn't provide that for them. And I think that's a really fair point, which funnily enough hasn't been brought up at all, and I only found it like the end of one article. So,
because you have, one out of the practiced religions in Australia, Christianity is the most dominant, being because we're a Western country, so it's going to be the one that's front and centre. And I guess I don't think it's so much a factor, but you could also attribute to the fact that our Prime Minister is an incredibly heavily religious individual. That could also be a large factor. So that debate has then, because I think especially in this country, a lot of these religious freedom debates always come back around to Christianity.
Yeah.
Like you look at where a lot of it started with like the Israel Folau debate. It was over his Christian faith, whereas there isn't so much. You don't see it forming around other religions.
Yeah, like I haven't heard anything on Buddhism or Hinduism or any of those minor religions in this country. It's just always about Christianity and Catholicism.
Yeah. And especially when you could argue that Islam is maybe one of the most unprotected religions in Australia. Christianity is incredibly protected, especially in the big scheme of things in other countries.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly protected religion in Australia. And although we don't have other religions being oppressed and stuff, they still don't have the same protections and are still targeted the same way. I think they often have more impetus to say, we actually want more protection.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I think although the bill had other bits on actions, if we just look at words and their role, should a religious person be able to say anything that they want? What do we think?
I think that they should have as much freedom as possible to say what they want. but it needs to be in the correct context. I think I'm a very firm believer in that secularism is a good thing, and that having religion separated from the state public life is a good way to just to facilitate harmonious function. And I think there's a time and a place for someone to engage in their religion, and I think places like the workplace, etc. I just think maybe aren't necessarily the correct places. Like, I know if I'm working, the last thing I would want is someone to come up to me and then start telling me about their religion, because you need to think of the appropriate time. And it's a really difficult one, whether religious people should be able to say what they want, because if you do allow that, of course there's going to be very extreme fringe people who will exploit that fact with that new freedom of speech. And when you do that, when you let those extremes happen, you get, in the past, you get things like Nazi Germany and things like that, when you give total freedom of speech. So it's a really difficult line to tread. And I don't think anywhere in the world has truly figured out what freedom of speech is.
Yeah, I think it's only really become an issue now with the availability of technology and messaging and words. Opinions are expressed so much more freely. And I'm not sure if I completely agree with you about that secularism is a good thing. I think it's an interesting one as to where you think religion fits into society, often then translates into your perspective on religious freedom.
Yeah.
And I think religion is still an important aspect of society in the way that it helps with education, with the growth of youth, to have some sort of strong platform. I still think that it is important. I still think that there's this innate desire in people for something greater, whether they want to admit it or not. So I think it's still important that we consider religion, even as it becomes a minority, which it will continue to become. I think its role in society shouldn't be undervalued.
Well, I was reading an article by The Guardian, and they've said that the new bill could provide greater protection to speech like that gay people are going to hell, that disabled people are possessed, and that pregnant, unmarried women are sinners. However, this provision does not protect statements that are malicious, would harass, vilify, or incite hatred or violence against a person or group, or which advocate for the commission of a serious criminal offence. And another really interesting perspective I found was from Michael Kirby, a former High Court Justice, and he stated that, quote, passages of scripture can be found for just about every prejudice known to man. Never forget that apartheid in South Africa was ultimately justified by reference to the supposed religious condemnation of misogyny, and that racial intolerance was based on the alleged inferiority of black people traced to contestable biblical texts. So it's really interesting. I like that perspective, because you could find in the whole range of religious texts prejudices that people could hide behind this book or this passage or whatever and say, well, it's in here, this is what I believe, and that gives me the right to openly hate and harass people.
Yeah, and that just goes on with what was directly written in the bill, which says, which was a concern that religious bodies can discriminate on the grounds of religion, where their conduct is, and I quote, in good faith and may reasonably be regarded as being in accordance with the doctrines, tenets, beliefs, or teachings of their religion. And this is where it gets tricky, because exactly what you said, all these parts of history
have been justified by religion.
They felt that it was in good faith and may reasonably be regarded as being in accordance with their religion.
Well, this is where my biggest problem with the bill starts, is that it just seems to be this really, I'm sure it's totally unintentional, because why would you, but it could really facilitate quite bad sectarianism in this country. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I like secularism because so much conflict and pain and suffering in the past has been caused by not religion, not the actual religion of Christianity or Judaism, but by the people practicing it and being stubborn and unadaptable towards what they believe. And I think what secularism does is that it comes into place and it says, and by saying that, well, perhaps maybe the church shouldn't be the highest authority in a society, and that, you know, there should be a state separated and unbiased from that church, but, you know, people who are religious can choose to enter the apparatus of the state. I think that is that is a good way of helping to remove a lot of those barriers that exist by not prioritizing one's faith in the functioning of a state. So even though Australia does have religious tensions, we're not falling into an all-out civil war like, you know, some places around the world, or we're not, we're not, you know, highly oppressive like some non-secular states in this planet. So I fear that by then introducing a bill that would allow discrimination on, you know, what was it, in good faith and in accordance to their scripture.
Yeah.
I worry that that's just going to allow then people to then just put themselves in those little boxes.
Yeah.
That, you know, going, well, I'm only going to work for these companies because they're Christian companies. I'm only going to work for this hospital or aged care facility because it's run by the Islamic Council of Australia. I think that's just going to start then causing us to become really, really insular, which would, especially for Australia, which is such a multicultural country, to then, you know, you see countries that struggle with two really insular religious groups. Imagine the chaos it could cause in Australia with multiple really insular groups, and that's what my fear about this bill is. Yeah.
Well, I agree with that to a certain point, but I also think that religion gives people a sense of identity and gives people their values and belief systems. And so I think religious bodies should be able to hire people that align with their core values. And just in the same way, employees get to apply for jobs and positions in certain businesses that align with their core values. Like, I don't think, for example, a Catholic teacher would apply for a position at an Islamic school, for example. They would rather go somewhere that aligns more closely with their beliefs and values. So I feel like religious bodies, I've read in The Guardian also that they aren't exempt from any other anti-discrimination legislation. So for example, religious schools could refuse to hire someone who does not adhere to that religion, but they could not fire or refuse to hire a gay teacher, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult one, and the other one that was part of the bill was about healthcare and doctors not refusing treatment but using their religion and their beliefs first as stating this. And I think I'm split on opinion. On one hand, regarding healthcare, I can see that if there's this, let's say, a religious doctor, they're at a practice, they only want to deliver treatment to these few people, like, they're going to run out of business so quickly, they're going to be ignored, word will spread around, and they will run out of patients and customers. Like, I feel like they'll be so heavily targeted against by people because of what they're doing that people won't go there, and then that person will just have to do whatever they want. But at the same time, in circumstances where it's an emergency or urgent treatment is needed, I still believe that right should come before any other right. That right to healthcare and to be able to actually have your human condition and to be well and healthy should be more important than someone else's beliefs.
That's true. And it also allows, like, businesses to refuse service to people that they don't align with. Like, for example, I know a wedding cake store, someone might be Christian or Catholic and not want to provide a cake to a gay wedding. I don't know, but I think that kind of aligns with, like, ethical shopping. Like, if I don't want to, like, buy something that's unethical because I don't want to proliferate like slave labor, maybe that is similar to not wanting to provide a cake, but they can just go somewhere else. Like I don't know.
Well, for me, that whole, but then having those exemptions just seem pointless. With what Simeon's saying, that, you know, this one person, say, refuses a 16-year-old girl who accidentally has gotten pregnant what is it, I think, like a morning after pill or something. Like, what's the point of then allowing them to do that if that's just going to cause them more prejudice? Like, it's a bit of a shooting yourself in your foot kind of situation, because I think Simeon's right. Australia is vastly becoming one of the most non-religious countries in the world, and even then that kind of behaviour is still, even a lot of religious people would still probably look down on that kind of behaviour, refusing someone healthcare. So I think it's just a really odd thing to do. And on the basis of what Alannah was saying on the refusal to, you know, say serve someone, I don't. That one just seems very odd to me, because I don't see why you say there was a big case, a very important case in Ireland where a wedding cake shop just didn't want to give it. They withheld a cake from a wedding that was paid for because they discovered that the wedding was for a gay couple. I don't see how, say, inconveniencing another is practicing your religion. Like, that just confuses me. I don't think that's practicing a religion. I think that's just kind of being a bit petty and making a point that inconveniences another for a reason other than that you slightly disagree with what their life is. So, like, I imagine your average person that serves you at McDonald's, you would not be completely aligned with them about their opinions on the world or their religion. So, you know, so you're not gonna, but they're not gonna ask you, oh, are you Jewish? And if you say yes, and then they say, oh, sorry, I don't agree with you, I'm not gonna serve you. That's just not gonna happen. It just doesn't seem like an important thing in a business transaction.
Yeah.
And this bill just, for some reason, has made it a really important thing when I just don't think it was in the first place.
Look, yeah. Well, like, I don't think it's right to be able to refuse service, but I think people should have the choice and the right to be able to do so. Like, I don't think it should be exercised, but I just think we should give people the freedom to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's
hard. It's really hard.
It's tricky as well because of this idea of religion, that in the past and previous years we've had discrimination for disability, discrimination for race, discrimination for sex, discrimination for age. These are things which you cannot change, they are part of you. Mm-hmm. And then we've got religious discrimination, and it's tricky because religion isn't one of these things which is just set in stone in you forever.
Yeah, you're not born Christian. You form those views.
You form those views.
And those views can change, and they can stop, and they can start again.
Yeah.
And they can be molded over time.
It's fluid.
Yeah, it's not one of those things that just sticks with you. And that's where it becomes tricky, that one person could say one thing and you justify their religion, and then say something else and say, oh, but I'm not that religion anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's where the issues become, or I'm part of a different religion.
Yeah, because you can't argue someone is not this religion, like, because you don't know what's in their heart. Like, you can't say, you are not Christian, you are not, no matter what you say, I don't believe it, and you can't prove that in court, so...
No.
Like, it's really hard because it's not something you can prove exists or doesn't exist within someone.
Oh, yeah, and it's also, like, people within the religion will have different views of that religion itself. Someone might think that, well, you look at the Catholic Protestant Church, they're both, at the end of the day, fundamentally Christian organisations. They believe that Jesus was the Son of God and that he came back to life after being crucified. But the way that they carry out their worship and the different sort of nuances and significance they place on different parts of Christianity is different.
Yeah, and it's huge. You've got some Christian churches who are fine with same-sex marriage and others that won't even let women be pastors. You know, it's like
Yeah.
you've got the full range under one same religion, and in that range you have a range of different beliefs and different interpretations.
Which is when something like this becomes really difficult. Yeah.
I think a perspective which I just really loved was by this lady. She was just giving her perspective. She's from DY. That's probably irrelevant, but I thought you should know. So, and she stated this in response to the bill. She said, "A great many of us neither seek nor need the freedom to discriminate, condemn, or exclude. Our belief system is not threatened by those who don't agree with us. Rather, it is enhanced by peaceful difference and constructive discussion." I love that quote.
So do I.
So much.
That's really powerful.
It's such a great perspective and demonstrates that the need for religious freedom maybe isn't as great as we think it is, because it's about that it's not threatened by those who don't agree with us, and that difference in that discussion is actually what makes it stronger and more powerful. Now, how do we move on from this comment? I don't know if it's too late. Like, have we already gone down the path of this legislation and laws that it's too late now?
Well, it's really hard because with like statements of belief, it's really similar to like political statements. Like, we have the freedom to say whatever we want politically and express our views on political topics. So why shouldn't people have the right to express their religious views?
Yeah, with that, I think there are some things, a lot of religion is, you say, well, it's up to my interpretation of it. I don't think, I think homosexuality is a sin or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think there are some objectively quite, dangerous comments that you can make, especially with including politics as well. Someone saying, we should be, the Bible said, there's a passage in the Bible that says, we should be stoning homosexuals, and that, that means they should be put to death or whatever. I think that's like, those are objectively like, okay, you really shouldn't say that because you're I think
those inciting the
inside,
commission of a serious criminal offence.
And I guess that is, as much as I don't like this bill, that is I'm glad that they've at least made that distinguish.
Yeah. Because
it at least says that, well, there is, at least it acknowledges that there is a line.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of the debate around this, I think some people seem to feel like with this bill doesn't draw a line. Well, at least it does draw, even though I think it is a little bit further than it should be, it still at least does put a mark. I think some people don't realise it at least just does put a mark down that says, okay, there is a point at which your religious freedom and right to express your religion is at risk.
What I don't understand is, if someone does not believe in hell, why is it offensive to them that they're going to hell for some reason? Like, for them, it's a made-up fantasy land that doesn't exist and they're not going to end up there. So why are they offended if someone says they're going to hell? Like, for example, if I was told by a Muslim that I was going to hell for eating bacon, it's not going to affect my life because I don't subscribe to that religion and I don't believe that that's what's going to happen to me. So why is it offensive to be told you're going to a made-up place?
I think you have to look at it as an individual case. I can't remember his name, but there was an ex-rugby player who was one of the very few openly homosexual players in Australian history, and he offered a good perspective on that. You have to look at it. There is so especially with men's sports, there are very few people who are openly gay in them, and it's
increasing though.
It's increasing, but he made the good point that say there might be a young homosexual rugby player who's really insecure about his sexuality, but and then he sees someone that he might really look up to condemning it and calling it wrong. You have to think about you can't. A lot of this offence stuff is that you have to be careful because you can't be in the psychology of another person. You can't be inside their head. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's happening. And I think whilst it might not have been causing anyone harm, that post, it's just a bit insensitive. And I think it was, at the end of the day, I don't even think it was a flawed statement anyway, because I think of the list of people, he said the only people in that list going to hell would be atheists, because you can be a homosexual but be a Christian, and in scripture that you go to heaven.
Yeah, well,
So
there's all the different
I think that was
interpretations.
I think that was an odd post to make anyway, but I think it was, a lot of it was just about, this is just a really insensitive and unhelpful thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because from his, if you look at his perspective, there was no intent of harm. It was just his putting his perspective out there. And my only real criticism, because I agree with Alannah's perspective, my only criticism is that this idea of creating a divide, and I think that's what these comments do, which I don't think is helpful for anyone or for anything, is that these comments kind of split two sides and create this
Us and then.
this kind of barrier and divide, which isn't helpful for Israel Folau, because that doesn't achieve what he wants to do. It's not helpful for anyone else, and that's where these comments frustrate me. However, I think we need to look at this idea of disagreement, of discussion, of debate, of accepting another one's ideas, because I feel that if we were better as a society of accepting and respecting other people's opinions, we wouldn't be having this discussion now.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the other things, like with his post, it wasn't just homosexuals. He was talking about like adulterers, stealers, like just sinners in general, and people just picked up on the homosexual part. And the other thing is, a lot of times the comments of "you're going to hell because of this" does come from a place of hate, but other times it does come from a place of love. Like, Christians want everyone to come to heaven with them, and so if I can tell you that cheating on someone is bad and I can help you through that, and then you'll go to heaven. Like, sometimes it comes from a place of love in wanting everyone to be happy forever, but like I said, it does sometimes come from just a place of pure hatred and just intending to cause harm and just having a malicious intent.
Well, picking out what you just said then, I think you have to realise that, homosexuality is not something people can help. You can try and suppress your desire and not act on them, but at the end of the day, it's something you're born with.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of psychology that proves that.
But a lot of religions
it's not a choice.
just want to say that isn't the case.
Yeah, and I think one of the really inflammatory things about that post is that a lot of those other things are choices that people make.
Yeah.
You choose to be an adulterer, you choose to be an atheist, and I think that was quite a sort of not very tactful way of addressing the relationships between homosexuality and religion, was then to just chuck it in with all these things that are choices, and all these things that are almost across the board, religion, non-religion, considered quite bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's where maybe a lot of people drew their ire towards this post on his social media.
Yeah, I think we also need to be aware that the whole debate of homosexuality and the free speaking of homosexuality within society has only really been present for about a decade.
That's true.
Before then, these people weren't even considered part of society.
Well, it was criminalised. Every acts were criminal.
Acts were considered criminal. So we need to keep that in mind, that people are still getting used to this idea of homosexuality and that being okay. And I know that sounds kind of blunt and harsh, but that's just the reality. For people in other cultures, you see with Germany and that hatred of the Jews, that took generations to get rid of because it was so deeply embedded within people. And obviously that hatred isn't the same as hatred towards homosexuals in Australia, but it's the same thing, that it takes time to be able to move on from a perspective, especially for people in an older community where that's always been the way. That's always been the same perspective.
It's hard when something, especially with homosexuality, when something that was hidden for so long because it was illegal, it's then I think hard for a lot of these people. I hear a lot of people go on about how they force it down your throat, which I think is absolute garbage. I don't think it's forced down the throat. It's just in the open. Yeah, it's just that it's not no one. I don't think anyone forces. And there's
no one forces you to be gay.
Yeah, and there's a reason why gay culture exists is because it was something that was so hidden, so people sought out one another, and that's how a subculture forms. Is that when something is usually secretive, and people seek out others who have the same lifestyle or experience the same things, and then a culture forms, and it's not being forced down people's throats. It's just in the open now because it's not viewed lowly upon anymore.
Yeah, I think something to end on, or some sort of solution or proposal or resolution, because in all honesty, I don't think this law is going to change a lot.
No.
I think it's going to keep on getting worse. There's more opinions out there. I don't think this law changes a whole lot. What I do think we can do is look at people's responses to these comments and to certain actions, and how can we assist in making those responses respectful and helpful in society. And I think the idea of education from a low level, from youth and even earlier in school, this idea about making different people's opinions freely available from a range of areas, and then being able to accept them respectfully and be able to enter into discussion and disagreement on those ideas and not on emotions or feelings or stereotypes or certain discrimination aspects against a person. I think through that we can then help to move people's responses to a more respectful way.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, having such a multicultural society in Australia, it's really helpful to have so many ranges of different beliefs and values, and to ignite a healthy discussion between more than 2,000. But it's just, it's healthy to have lots of beliefs, because if we just have one core belief, then society wouldn't run properly.
It would be difficult, and then when someone steps outside of that, that one really, really solid, quiet, dominant belief, then that person will be targeted. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, those range of beliefs need to be encouraged and appreciated and supported, and this bill and how it's being portrayed doesn't actually support that range of beliefs. It's a very two-sided debate. We're 100% on this, 100% on that, even if the actual words of the bill doesn't fit into that perspective. I think we definitely need to acknowledge the importance of different beliefs and how we can ensure that conversations that we have and that actions that we have reflect that appreciation and that respect.
Yeah. Well, all in all, I just want religious freedom and freedom of speech to the highest capacity until it incites violence and hatred. So I think it's healthy to have a high level of freedom of speech, but obviously when it does spill into horrific circumstances with malicious intent, I think that should be criminalized.
Yeah, for me, I just think we're still really trying to figure out
where the line is.
The line is, what is freedom of speech, what's reasonable freedom of speech, figuring out the line is, how much should a state interfere with the church? Well, because we've only just recently, in recent history, separated the church from the state. So I think, for me, we're still trying to figure it out. This bill is one step. It mightn't be the best step, but it's one step in trying to find a way that we strike the balance of religion in contemporary society and non-religion in contemporary society.
Yeah, and that's the good thing about living in a democracy and this being statute law, is that it always has the capacity to be changed, to be looked into. We see that in lots of different times, and we need to make that clear as well that this is a trial. We're giving it a go, we'll see what happens.
Yep.
I think we need to trial a lot more things as well. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of the Power of Youth podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and please let us know your thoughts in the comments or through any of our social media, and make sure to share the podcast with all your friends and people that you know.